and welcome to the Federal's Worldly Wise program, a weekly show where we discuss geopolitical developments in detail with our consulting editor KS Dakshina Murthy, a specialist in international relations. The Iran conflict stretches into a complex multi front war, and US President Donald Trump claims that the US is nearing completion of its objectives and could be, quote unquote, out of Iran pretty quickly. But questions are mounting over what victory actually looks like. And the big question is who's really winning the war and what does winning even mean here? So, sir, thank you for joining. My first question to you is the US and Israel claim major military success, decimating Iran's military infrastructure, while Iran argues survival itself is victory. So, in a war where both sides claim success, how should we realistically define winning? Is it military dominance or a regime change or simply survival?
See, in a conventional war, let's say one country occupies territory of another, pushing that country out back is a win. So this is what happened in the case of the Iraq-Iran war, where Iraq tried to encroach on Iranian territory. This was in 1980. And then Iran, over a period of time, pushed the Iraqis back. And at the end of it, there was no gain for Iraq, which was the original aggressor. So in that war, one can clearly say that Iran had won that particular war. Or if you take, let's say, Kuwait and Iraq, where Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then Iraq was pushed back. So again, clearly there was a win. If you take the current war, which the US and Israel are waging on Iran, what would constitute a win? uh, Constituting a win would mean, it's very unclear because the motive itself was unclear. If you remember, the U.S. was negotiating with Iran before February 28th, when the current conflict started. And what was the aim behind the negotiation? It was to open up Iran's nuclear power for international inspection. It was also to ensure that the enriched uranium already present in Iran to be handed over to a third party, say like Russia, or under the supervision of the IAEA. And if that had been achieved, which was what more or less was done by Barack Obama in 2015, that would have been the purpose, a certain purpose behind the negotiation. But then when the US and Israel started attacking Iran, what were they hoping to achieve? Now, the US and Trump has been constantly saying that their idea is to demolish Iran's nuclear capabilities and completely neutralize its ballistic missile program and ensure that Iran can never again become a nuclear power. So now, fine. So, as if you take that as a yardstick, it looks like as of now the US has kind of done, though we do not know to what extent, but the US has demolished some of the major nuclear reactors, which nuclear centers which Iran was using in Isfahan, in Natanz, and all that. So to that extent, yes, the US has succeeded in destroying or damaging to some extent or to a large extent Iran's facilities. So that is, so if you look at that, yes, the US has managed to put it across Iran, and it is continuing to do so. If you take Israel, now what was Israel's motive? Now, Israel's motive was to ensure that this current regime change, in fact, more than the US, it was Israel which wanted a change of guard in Iran, because since the time the Iranian revolution happened, the Iranian government, the regime that took over, the Khomeini regime under Ayatollah Khomeini, has been very much anti-Israel, and has proved to be one of the worst rivals or enemies of Israel, and has threatened Israel over a period of time. So Israel wanted that to happen. Now that has not happened so far. That has not happened. But some people have been killed by both the strikes. The Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was the supreme leader at the start of this conflict, he was assassinated, and a range of very senior figures have been killed. So both Israel and the US are claiming that we have managed to change the regime, and that this current regime, which have with the current crop of leaders who have replaced the older ones, are more amenable to conversation. Now, the US has been claiming this, but this has not been proven in reality, because Iran continues to insist that there is no negotiation, which means that the second crop of leader too, like starting with Mustafa Khamenei, who replaced Ali Khamenei, his father. So even he has not made any such statement, nor has the President Pezeshkian, of Iranian president too. He has also stuck to the same point. So this is just a claim. So the second rung of people who have come to power in Iran have more or less remained the same as the previous one. So which means obviously means that Iran continues to hold fast, despite the fact that they have lost territory. So on this ground, on the count of regime change, Iran has won. I mean, so far at least, Israel and the US have not succeeded in their plan. So if you look at it that way, so even if you, the other element of this attack was to neutralize Iran, um, but without taking into account the repercussions. The US and Israel did not really take into account the repercussions. Also, because what happened last year, if you take last June, there was a 12-day attack, 12-day war on Iran, and Iran retaliated, but to a limited extent. It had not really expanded into the region, and it had not had major repercussions around the world. So this probably misled Trump and Netanyahu to imagine that it would be something similar. But what Iran has done is Iran has retaliated asymmetrically. That is how this is being termed as, which means that in an unconventional manner, Iran has retaliated in an unconventional manner, targeting U.S. interests and in the region, and wherever possible, Israeli interests as well. So what this has managed to do is that it has expanded the scope of this war, and it has brought in allies of the US into the conflict. Number one, and then the Strait of Hormuz is really interesting, because before this conflict started, the Strait of Hormuz was free. There was no restriction on the ships which could go in and out of any country, of any goods. So that was something that triggered, that the conflict triggered, the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz was triggered by the conflict. Now what Trump is saying is that that needs to be cleared for the war to end. So basically you are coming back to the starting point where nothing much has changed. It's a status quo, because this was what it was before the war. The Strait of Hormuz was never under Iranian control. The Iranians did not exert their pressure on the Strait of Hormuz. So, in that sense, the US has lost out as far as this Strait of Hormuz is concerned. And the next big point is, let's assume that the war ends tomorrow or the next week or 10 days later. What would it leave, and where would it leave the region? Where would it leave the US? Where would it leave Israel and Iran? Actually, pretty much the same. There won't be much of a change other than the damage which Iran has encountered. But Iran can make up these damages over the years. It's not like it is once and for all finished. I mean, there are people, they have the technology, they have support from many countries around the world. They can rebuild these things very easily. But Trump's tenure is only for the next 2 years or 3 years. I mean, in fact, probably next 3 years. So uh, Trump's term is short-lived, but Iran is going to be there for a very long time. And even as far as Israel is concerned, Netanyahu is going to have a certain life there. He's going to have elections. Whether he wins or not, we don't know. But as far as Trump is concerned, very clearly he can't continue beyond 3 years. But it's not the case with Iran. Iran will bide its time and it will rebuild. So who has won this conflict? So obviously, it may be a timely setback. It may be a setback now for Iran, but over the long run, it will make up. So in that sense, too, the US strategy or the Israeli strategy of bombing Iran has really, makes no sense, and it will not work.
So, who do you think is the who's actually benefiting from this war, apart from the from the geopolitical developments? Apart from the war, who's benefiting from the geopolitical developments because of this whole situation?
See, if you take Iran, it has turned out that by de facto, their biggest supporters have turned out to be the Europeans, who are the closest allies of the US. So, one of the biggest losses for the US of a Trump is the loss of face or loss of credibility amongst his own allies, the NATO allies. You have countries like Britain, countries like France, Italy, Spain, turning around and saying, sorry, we cannot be part of this war. It's not our war. And not only that, not only have they rhetorically or, by have they made such clear-cut statements, they have actually blocked the US from using the air bases in these countries to attack Iran. So it's a huge statement. And then when Trump was cornered as far as the Strait of Hormuz was concerned, now it was, he turned to the NATO allies and asked them for help, asked them to send in their ship to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And the Europeans said, sorry, no, we can't. So this is a diplomatic win for Iran. Iran, we know the NATO allies who, for the last 70 years, despite some setbacks here and there, were always with Trump, have finally turned around and called out the US and its actions. It is Trump now, but as a nation. Now the repercussions of this, whether how far it will go, whether it will continue beyond Trump, or this is just a minor hiccup, we'll know in the next few years, as long once Trump leaves the scene, whether this kind of a break will it become larger. But clearly, what this will show to the European nations, and many of them are already thinking along these lines, that this kind of a unquestioned alliance with the US is turning back to bite them. It's going to be disadvantageous. But if you look at it from the point of view of winning and losing, clearly the US has lost out on this. They have lost out their close allies. And not only that, if you look at the coverage of this war around the world, you'll find that morally people are with Iran, because there seems to be no justification for the war to start off with. I mean, it was, though, if you talk to the MAGA supporters or Trump supporters, what they say is that Iran was preparing, and they were imagining that Iran was preparing to develop their nuclear power and then attack. So, on that hypothetical assumption, they say that what the US did was a preemptive act. So, under the guise of preemption, you can always say anything and then do anything. So, it's because nobody can check this out. This doesn't test out as far as any concrete evidence is concerned. So, clearly, Trump has lost out big time as far as his allies in Europe are concerned. The Iranians have one big major sympathy, and also remember that Iran is not a new nation like what the US is. Iran is an old civilization, and much of its many of its very valuable civilizational architecture, which belongs to the whole world, like this, some of the big palaces that they have in Tehran, some of this absolutely grand structures, which the Iranians for many decades have made a point to carefully preserve and guard, have all been, many of them have been destroyed, have been damaged. That being the case, it's the world sympathy is naturally with Iran, because not only has Iran lost, the world itself is losing its heritage, because Iran is being bombed mercilessly and without any recklessly, without any kind of consideration for these factors.
So let's talk about Donald Trump, sir. Donald Trump has alternated between declaring victory and then pushing for negotiations, threatening escalation, and then saying that we spoke to Iran and they are asking for ceasefire, such statements. So, does the lack of a clear US endgame signal strategic confusion, and how does that impact the outcome of this war?
That is the other thing about this entire war that is going on, and which has affected the entire world. is that the US and especially the Trump administration does not seem to have a clear strategy, because this entire premise on which Trump started the war was, the assumption was Iran would buckle quickly, because it was also imagined, it was their own claim, that is the US's claim, that in June last year, when they attacked the nuclear power center and the nuclear reactors in Iran, and they felt that, they assumed that Iran was already weakened. And now when the second wave of attack happened by Israel and the US, they assumed that Iran would buckle down, or they would come to some kind of a negotiation, offer to do what the US wanted. So when that did not happen, that hasn't happened. Trump is completely at a loose end. Just imagine, he has been saying that Iran is actually asking for a ceasefire, and claiming that negotiations are going on at the back end with Iran. And Iran has been very categorical in stating that there has been no negotiation with the US. So, but then you have Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. So, what about them? What they have been doing is they are acting like interlocutors. So, which means carrying messages from the US to Iran and from Iran to the US. So, directly, the US and Iran have still not spoken to each other. But Trump is interpreting this, or claiming this as some kind of a negotiation, and that Iran is crying for ceasefire. So, Trump is making these tall claims, and when Iran is not obliging, suddenly Trump is unable to fathom, or the Trump's not only Trump, his thinker, his team, people who are behind this war, they are unable to figure out how exactly to end this, because the biggest issue in this war, in this conflict, is who is going to emerge winner, who will be the winner and who will be the loser. So the US and Israel do not want to appear as if they have lost, and this Iran too does not want to appear as if they have lost, because when you when where, because that is the nature of this conflict. So you have these two big sides which are fighting with each other, and each one trying to project itself as the winner, or the other side as the loser. So Iran is not giving an opportunity for Trump to do that, and Trump is completely losing way. So that is the reason why you have this constant shifting of priorities. First saying that we will end the war in 2-3 weeks, then saying we will bomb Iran to the Stone Ages. And as far as Israel is concerned, Israel too did not expect the kind of retaliation from Iran, because both of them grossly underestimated the number of missiles and drones which Iran has in its possession, and it's much more than what anybody had estimated. And there are reports of huge underground terminals where these have been stored, they have been kept, and it's probably much more than anyone can imagine. And you have a situation where Iran is constantly coming out with missiles and drones, while the West is expecting Iran to dry out of these things. So all these factors are causing massive strategic confusion in Washington and in Tel Aviv. So both Israel and the US are unable to come to a kind of an understanding as to how to end this conflict. So that is the reason why you find Trump making all these completely inconsistent, illogical, and sometimes absolutely ludicrous kind of claims, like taking Iran back to the Stone Age and stuff. Yeah.
Let's come to the India angle and where does India fit in all this? So, India maintains ties with the US, the Israel, and Iran, making this conflict diplomatically sensitive. So, can India continue its strategic balancing act, or will it be forced to take clear positions as the conflict escalates?
See, typically what happens is when a country is on the fence, it's neither here nor there. Like that has been India's foreign policy, and for a very long time, and especially this government has, in some ways, the saying, running with the hare and hunting with the hound. So basically the Indian foreign policy or the Indian government sometimes is very close to Israel and the US, like the Modi's visit to Israel 2 days before the conflict started. At the same time, you also have India has heavy stakes in the Middle East, in West Asia, where there are millions of Indian workers who are there, and India also shares a long-term strategic relationship with all these countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, all these countries. So, as far as India is concerned, India is unable to take a position and it is paralyzed. But things are changing for India because the US, and especially under Trump, is becoming quite, in some ways, unreasonable. Trying to arm twist India into making commitments, and also at the same time not letting India, have a free run as far as its relationship with Iran is concerned. So typically, and India has refused to take an open position as to where it stands so far. The Modi government has until now not taken a very clear position on where India stands as far as this conflict is concerned. For one, it has not criticized the US or Israel in the manner in which they started the conflict, nor have they, assured Iran of their support. Though, yes, I mean, one must say that India did concretely help Iran, by saving their two ships which are berthed in Visakhapatnam and all that. So India has helped Iran, and Iran has reciprocated by allowing Indian ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So at that very practical, basic level, India has managed to retain some kind of a relationship with both the US, Israel, and Iran on one side. But what typically happens is that when it comes to a case of when it comes to the crux and India is forced to take a position, then India is going to have a serious issue, because India can't let go both the sides, because it has built big stakes on all sides, and at the same time it cannot keep quiet, because then it will be seen as being very timid and one without any kind of a say. So India also had this great opportunity to mediate, which it did not, because if it had mediated, it could have turned its position into a position of advantage. It could have then it would have had the opportunity to talk to Iran. It would have had the opportunity to talk to Israel and the US, and maintained a certain kind of high-profile kind of a status, where the rest of the world too would be giving that kind of credit to India, like what Pakistan is doing now. Suddenly, Pakistan, from out of the blue, is making news as far as the negotiations are concerned. So, in that sense, well, India has not been, the Indian government has not really played its cards the way it ideally should have.
Okay. So clearly, this is a war where battlefield victories don't necessarily translate into strategic success. And as this war continues, the bigger question remains not who is winning today, but who can sustain the cost of this war tomorrow. Viewers, thank you for watching us, and thank you, Dakshin sir, for your time.